football outside of Britain amongst a lot of fans simply because they're successful. It's sad to say, I don't think many American fans can be accused of chasing a glory hunting team by following Spurs.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that. We've mentioned to other guests that have come on from over there that NBC had run a study early before this season had started, and that Tottenham had the largest by poll following in the United States. And there are people who look for that instant gratification. American society is a little bit built around that. I mean, because of the bigger the better, the stronger type of attitude that we have as Americans. But there is also this root for the underdog type of mentality that we have. We're all for that. It's why I'm pulling for Bradford in the FA Cup. You can really latch onto something like that. And when I was blog writing before I did the podcasting, I wrote how I found Spurs, or how I let Spurs choose me, basically over an 18-month-long process of trying to figure out how I was going to choose my club, because I knew that it was one of these deals where once you make that choice, you don't waffle on it and you don't switch. So I wanted to really make sure that by reading up on the history, and thank you for that because your books helped, and looking at the YouTube videos and looking at the past and what the future may hold for each club, I knew in an instant that I didn't want to be a front runner. I wasn't going to jump on with City and Chelsea and United especially, and so it came down to a handful of clubs like Everton and Spurs and Liverpool and along those lines. And I mentioned it last week, Sam and the stories that he told and that we'll continue to tell with Adam and him, is that it's just a reaffirmation for me that I chose correctly, because Spurs lines up with the mentality I have as an American supporter of the sports over here, but that this sport has overtaken my mentality and my passion more than any others. I'm a baseball fan, a football fan, a hockey fan. I like all that stuff. I don't podcast for it. I don't blog write for it. There's something about the English Premier League and this damn club, for as much as it's already broken my heart a few times, but the jubilation that I have felt when we defeated Arsenal, when we crushed Chelsea after going a goal down, it's worth it because of those moments and the future moments. We're all getting together, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas Spurs in one giant group down in Austin for the cup final. It's like every week is away days for us, but this is the club that we've all chosen, and because of the reasons that you guys have talked about, it's the right choice. It can be, if you could take one club and say this is the club that best represents America and its fans, it's Tottenham Hotspur.
But you can't help but get some joy out of that. I mean, what you just said is wonderful, because and I suppose that's where your question came from. First of all, there's a view that somehow you have to be loyal, relationship, but actually that's why this is such a fantastic sport for a club. It's such a wonderful thing because people can get into it that much wherever they're from, whatever background, and they can feel that love. Are we mining the past a little bit too much? And the accusation is that a lot of Spurs fans are living in the past because the present hasn't been that brilliant. It's all very relative, obviously. But the hunger for the information about the history of the club that comes from the fans overseas is absolutely astonishing. When the India Spurs set up, first of all, I worked with one of the guys who started off the India Spurs on the Spurs board now, and he said, can you write some stuff for the website, because these guys want to know about what happened in the 1901 Cup final, and why did the rivalry of Arsenal start, and what's this whole thing about the Payne's Boots affair in 1920. I'm thinking, how do you know about this? How are you interested in this stuff if you're a 19-year-old growing up in Delhi, or Houston or wherever? Why would you want to know all that stuff? But there's this real hunger for the history of the club, where it came. I don't know whether it's a bloke thing. When you get into a band, you can kind of get into who influenced that band, and you kind of go backwards down the line, don't you? So I don't know.
Well, I think that when you go search for a club to follow, I think it's more about just the here and now. I mean, you're talking about a league, right, that has tremendous history, especially relative to other countries' sports, particularly the U.S. And, we have history, we have substance. So I think a lot of people can look at a Spurs and say, well, there's been some success recently, but nobody can accuse me of being a bandwagon fan. And there's something easy to be passionate about because there is such great history. So ironically, what English supporters get so wound up by other clubs about is, are you clinging on to your history? Well, that actually becomes that becomes something that is a draw to the new supporter.
So that contradicts this idea that the criticism of modern football is that it was a skylight to say it was invented in 1992, and a lot of the records now are just since 1992. And this idea that football's only been around for 20, 25 years, but and the view that's put forward is that all of the the Premier League is a fantastically successful global business brand, if you want to talk about it in those terms. But it's that not just because of what's happened in the last 20 years. It's that because it was based on something that meant something to people going back 100, 120 years as well. I think that's quite important.
I think one of the things too that's interesting to me is the connection with, and I think maybe this is why Tottenham have such a big following here in the United States. It's its connection with the United States men's national team. We've been in connection with the club, and Simon's been doing some bartering as well as Sam on our part to have Brad Friedel come on, a future ambassador of the club, but a current player, and the club and Brad have both agreed to finally do that. But with him, DeAndre Yedlin, Cameron Carter-Vickers, these players, along with Dempsey and Casey Keller and all the others, there is such a connection with the United States men's national team that I think it becomes easy for an American fan to say, well, there's an in, there's an inroad as to why this should be my club.
Well, and that happened with Fulham a few years ago.
Yeah,
McBride and Dempsey and
Carlos Bocanegra. Yeah.
It was Fulham America, I believe.
Yeah, they're really the only two English Premier League clubs, at least that I can think of, that had U.S. men's national team players. I remember West Ham had, who was the guy?
John Harkes. And he was
he was at Wednesday. Yeah, he was at Wednesday. In fact, he was the first, and that was back in the first division. It was before even the Premier League, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
it was.
Anyway, but yeah, it's great. Great to see.
The other connection, of course, is Steve Nash, isn't it?
Yeah,
yes,
from
indeed.
the Suns and from the Lakers. Yeah, from NBA fame and Dallas Mavericks as well. He was a big part of that cog, and it's not just him. Adam Richman, and there are many, just like over there, the famous people group of people. You see that list growing exponentially. I support Tottenham, I support Tottenham, and I support Tottenham. And you get some of the ones that just want to go for the glory and the glam, and they want to go to Old Trafford or Stamford Bridge or whatever, and maybe rub shoulders with Abramovich or the Glaziers. Boston. There is a very deep Boston Spurs. Very, very well known, but Liverpool own Boston because of John Henry owning the club, and he also owns the Boston Red Sox. So they'll play a lot of their preseason friendlies at Fenway Park, and they draw. They pack the place, 40,000 people or whatever that will actually hold.
I mean, guys, can I sort of turn it around and ask you a question? Because it obviously American sport to a large extent is based on the franchise system. Whereby clubs and brands are quite often, prepared to move around and move across the country into different time zones. So is that partly a reaction? Is that partly of the appeal for American fans that British football has such deep, long-standing roots?
Simon, what do you think?
Well, I mean, obviously I grew up in the UK, and I see Adam's point with it's a real head-scratcher. I turned up in the States, and about a year later, Dallas got its own hockey team with a team that moved from Minnesota, which just had me scratching my head. I was happy because I liked ice hockey, but I actually was doing some work in Minneapolis and went to one of the last games that season before they moved, and unfortunately I think I had a Dallas Cowboys jacket on the time, and I just got some wicked abuse.
Yeah.
The hate towards the ownership, I'd never seen anything like it. So obviously when Wimbledon moved to Milton Keynes, you could very easily sympathize with those fans. That was unprecedented in the UK. So it's obviously not an appeal to me. And so I'd see, like to see what Ken has to say.
Yeah, this actually hits really home for me. I grew up an NFL fan more than anything, NFL and baseball. And I grew up as a kid in Houston, believe it or not, 25 years, and I was a massive Houston Oilers fan. That team and its owner uprooted and went off to Tennessee and became the Tennessee Titans. And then Houston revamped and got its own football team in the Texans, but since that time I had left Houston, moved to Florida, and came here to Dallas on a work transfer. And my wife was a big Cowboys fan, her whole family, but I grew up despising the Cowboys. As much as a Spurs fan would despise Arsenal, I hated them, and still they're not the team I support. And in fact, because of that move that the club made, I have no affiliation with an NFL franchise. If I watch 12 quarters of football a year, it's a lot, and I'll enjoy the playoffs and the Super Bowl and things like that. But there's been a lot of that throughout the history. Baseball teams move around, football teams move around. They're chasing that almighty dollar, and as London looks to try to capture an NFL team, Jacksonville has been the most rumored team that's going to end up going over and becoming the London franchise. So when you have people that, one of the things that really enamored me about Spurs is that they've been in the same spot for over 125 years. They're not going anywhere. And I think that even became more evident when everybody was kind of okay with not getting the Olympic Stadium thing, because N17 is where Tottenham should be, and as it appears will be for a very long time, hopefully for hundreds of years to come, as the game progresses and as they continue to grow their history. But Sam, I don't know if you have a viewpoint on this, on the whole moving around thing, and believe me, the rivalries are there. But when I have a lot of my American friends that can't spell soccer, let alone try to know anything about the game, and they ask me, what is it with you that you've become so enamored with this sport? I said, do yourself a favor. Take the Cowboys, the Texans, the Eagles, the Redskins, all the teams that you hate. Take about 12 of them and put them in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in different areas, and that is your rivalries. They are blocks away from each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, look, there's certainly cultural differences that make real differences in how supporters behave and act and think, and I think it's really two things in my mind. These are youthful leagues. I mean, you're talking a football league, right? I mean, it predates. It predates the 1900s. You don't have that in the U.S. You don't have that sense of history. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's certainly history in U.S. sports franchises. But also the other thing is you're talking about a much smaller country, England, and there's far greater of a neighborhood feel versus, I think, kind of a provincial mindset, if you will. Like, look, I work with a ton of people in New York, but there's Jets fans, there's Giants fans, there's Eagles fans, some even, are Patriot fans. I mean, you just don't really get that in London. I mean, if you're in North London, you're either, typically speaking, the Scum or Spurs. If you're in, West London, you're Chelsea or QPR or, maybe Palace. And it's just, I don't know. I think that probably has a lot to do with it. But what's happening now, and I think Martin and I talked about this last week, was that it's really football, soccer, and I hate the word. I hate the word soccer. I just despise it. But what's happened, and the reason why it's finding shelf space here in the U.S. is, people always used to lament, well, it'll never take off in the U.S. because there's just not a season to fit it in. It competes with too many other sports. In the fall, particularly, i.e., football, American football. But what's happened is that because of NBC's genius and they have outstanding coverage, all this stuff comes on Saturday and Sunday morning before college football, before the NFL. So all of a sudden, the Americans have found a way to fit the season in. Ironically, I think it'll always be far more popular than the MLS as a result, because the MLS physically has to compete with the NFL and the other major U.S. sports.
You say that there's two things there, because I think often, when we try and make the comparison between why people follow sports and the whole kind of franchise question, that the thing that is really obvious, but a lot of people forget, is that England is an incredibly small nation within a set of 3 or 4 other nations, and America is incredibly big. And a lot of the reason that those local rivalries and those attachments are there, and those hatreds, if you like, are because if Spurs play Manchester United on a Wednesday night, I can take half a day off work, get up there, and come back again with a very late night and get to work the next morning. I can't go from New York to Washington or from Dallas to New York or whatever and do that. So that tradition of having the local rivals, but also of following the team and going on to somebody else's patch isn't there. So I think, and that's not often acknowledged. I don't think it's something that's